The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show. Thanks for joining me on this Monday. I love Mondays. Mondays you get back to work. It's a lot of fun when the work you do is one that you love. All right, of course I worked over the weekend. We did a couple of shows over the weekend, and let me start by apologizing for, I hate doing that, but anyway, before yesterday, those of you who were on live yesterday know that luckily at the end of kind of a big point, right, at the end of the main theme of my show yesterday, my computer, my entire setup froze. My computer just crashed. Now that hasn't happened in a long time, but then I remembered that I had made the mistake early yesterday of upgrading to the latest Apple operating system, Catalina, something 15.2 or whatever, 10.15.2. And doing a little bit of research online, it turns out that Catalina has this tendency to crash. Now, I haven't gone backwards, so I'm hoping that today it won't do it. If it does, then I'm going to have to downgrade my operating system. It hasn't crashed all day today. It crashed twice yesterday. So today it seems to be okay. We will see. We will hope. I'm not big on hoping. I don't believe much in hope, but we will see. So I apologize for that. There was a bunch of super chat questions yesterday that I did not get to. I will try to get to them today. And if I don't get them today, we'll definitely dedicate a portion of my next show, which will probably be Thursday after Christmas, to answering those questions. So they will definitely be covered. Sorry I didn't get to them yesterday, but computers crash. Now, yesterday's show I think was important for today's show because to some extent there's a certain continuation continuation from yesterday's show to today's show. The theme around them both is, basically the complete collapse, irrelevancy of the right. So the state of the right today, and where I think the future of the right is heading. As I mentioned yesterday, I'd say mainstream conservatism, the mainstream right, mainstream Republican Party as represented by former Tea Party Senator Marco Rubio, is a complete capitulation to the left, a complete surrender on at least on all the economic issues and on many of the cultural issues to the left. They have nothing original to say, nothing to offer. They have given up on the welfare state. They have given up on basic economics. They have given up on industrial policy. They've given up on regulation. They've given up on controls. They've given up on even the state ownership of the means of production. It comes close to, if you follow the logic of Marco Rubio that I presented yesterday. Today, I want to talk about the consequences of all that. And I've talked about this before, but we'll talk about this more in depth today, or maybe not in more depth, but a different angle than we have in the past. But basically, the rise of what some people are calling a dissident right. I don't particularly like the term dissident right because I think it lumps together too many different groups, but we'll talk about that. But the rise of opposition to the stale, boring, compromising, defeated, incompetent right Republican Party conservative movement. Now, the context, and you might have noticed the name of the show today is Age Pervert, and the future of the American right. And many of you probably don't know who Bronze Age pervert is. And I didn't know until a few weeks ago when a good friend of mine, Brad Thompson, I don't think he minds me mentioning him, may be listening. He told me he would listen. I don't know if he is on right now live. But Brad pointed me to an issue of the Claremont Review of Books. Now, the Claremont Review of Books is a bastion of kind of old line conservatism, a place that has been critical of the neoconservatives for a long, long time. Not quite Buchanan paleo-conservatives, but the conservatives of old, I think. A conservatism that at least says that it harkens back to the Founding Fathers, with, of course, a heavy dose, as all conservatives in the modern time have, of religion. So religion, tradition, America, love of the Founding Fathers. That is the Claremont Review of Books. And Brad pointed me to a review written in the Claremont Review of Books of a book written by Bronze Age pervert called The Bronze Age Mindset. Bronze Age pervert is, I don't know, based on everything I've read so far, kind of an intellectual among the non-intellectuals on the alt-right. The alt-right that I talked about a couple of years ago. The alt-right that is always in the background, the alt-right that many of you claim doesn't exist, but appears on my YouTube stream quite often, quite frequently. Bronze Age Pervert wrote this book, self-published, no publicist, no publisher, put it up on Amazon, and has received tens of thousands of downloads, of purchases. It reached 150 in the overall Amazon list, which is pretty amazing. It's still ranked pretty high and has been read, obviously many times, and is very popular among young people on the internet. Bronze Age Pervert has a Twitter feed of about 29,000, which is not that much. I mean, I have 20-something thousand, 22,000. Mine shrinks constantly because of my criticism of Trump. It expands and it shrinks and expands and shrinks. It tends to be shrinking more these days than expanding. But he has a large following on Twitter and elsewhere. But what was interesting is not just that the Claremont Review of Books reviewed it. What was interesting is who reviewed it. The guy who reviewed it is his name is Michael Anton, and Michael Anton. There's so much to say about all this. It's finding a structure here is going to be the challenge. There's so much to take. Because Michael Anton wrote a very famous, very influential essay during the elections of 2016 called Flight 93. And I think I talked about this essay in one of my early shows during that election season. Because Flight 93 was a very powerful essay in support of Trump. And the basic thesis that Anton presented in Flight 93 is that the country is going to hell. Everything is lost. We are finished. The left, basically, has control of the plane. And if you remember, Flight 93 is the flight that on 9/11 was heading probably either to the White House or to Congress, heading back to Washington, D.C. It's on a suicide mission. You're all going to die. Flight 93, in this case, is America. America is on a suicide mission. It's on a suicide mission led by the left, led by the cultural political left, that is going to crash the plane, to crash America, to destroy America. And what do you do? What do you do in a case where you know on a plane that's going to crash and would destroy not only the people on the plane, but everything, your entire world, everything you love, everything you care for. Well, you rush the cockpit in an attempt, a probably futile attempt, probably an attempt that will fail in order to stop them. And in the process, you might lead to that same suicide, that same death and destruction. But there's a slight chance, there's a little chance that you will be somehow successful. And Anton presented the election of Donald Trump as rushing the cockpit. He said all the things Donald Trump's bad in this respect and in that respect, and it's tribalism, and it's, he's not a good person, and he's not a role model, and his policies are bad, and this is bad. But he said he's the only person, and I know people who still think this. He's the only person who will stand up to the left. He's the only person who might, by a fluke, by chance, be able to steer this plane away from suicide, be able to save Flight 93 from crashing, be able to save America. Buy us at least some time, because the left is going to destroy us, and now we need some time. Now, after the election, Anton went and served in the Trump administration as in a national security capacity, and has left since, and is now back writing. When he published Flight 93, the Flight 93 election, the most important election of our lifetime, he said, and if the left won, if Hillary Clinton won, the country was absolutely finished. Donald Trump was the only chance we had to somehow, maybe, avoid complete destruction. When he wrote that essay, he wrote it under a pseudonym. And I forget the pseudonym, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, it was so politically incorrect to write what he was writing that he wrote under a pseudonym. Pseudonyms play a big role in the story because fear plays a big role in the story. Now Anton is back. Everybody knows he wrote that essay, and he's back and now is a prominent, regular, featured writer at the Claremont Review of Books and in other conservative places, and is a prominent intellectual within the right. And I think the conclusion Anton has come to, and I might be wrong because I'm no expert on him, is that Trump is not going to save us. Is that Trump has not been able to save us, that the country is still heading towards this disaster, towards this crash, towards this inevitable end. And, Anton would like to resurrect the founding principles with some religion to bring about, saving Flight 93, saving this country. But it cannot be. It cannot be successful because the fact is that the culture, the left, is so entrenched, it's so dominant that there is no hope for this country. And I think in that context, he reviewed this book by Braun's Age Pervert. But not only did the Claremont Review of Books have him review the book and publish the review, but then they had a section, I guess they own this website called AmericanMind.org, which is articles outside of the framework of the Claremont Review of Books, which, as is stated, is a journal that reviews books. It's a very good journal. It's a very fascinating, very intellectual. The way they review books is usually they either take a book or a series of books and they discuss a whole theme. So it becomes more than a review of a book. It becomes a discussion of a phenomenon, an intellectual phenomenon in the culture. And it's super interesting if you're interested in what the intellectuals on the right or what the conservatives or a certain brand of conservatives are thinking. And it's important because they have immense cultural influence. Anyway, they devoted a whole section of the AmericanMind.org to other people commenting both on Anton's review of Braun's Age Pervert and let's just call him BAP, which is what everybody else does, BAP. Bronze Age Pervert is now BAP. So I don't have to go through that tongue twister and with my accent, I'm probably distorting what I say. Anyway, so let's just call him BAP. So they had a series of about a dozen different articles discussing BAP and his book, Bronze Age Mindset, BAM, BAP and BAM. And as at Brad's urging, I went and looked at this and actually read it, and have now read both the review of the book. I read BAP's response to the review of the book, which was published on American Mind. And then I read about a dozen of these articles about BAP and BAM and Anton. And it all presents a pretty scary picture of the right, of what's going on the right, and the response of various people to what is going on in our culture, in our world, and on the right. So let me begin by kind of giving you my quick run of the state of the world. A run that I think that most of these writers would agree with. BAP, Anton, and everybody who commented on them. The state of the world is that our culture, our educational institutions, and almost our entire political dialogue and debate are ruled today by the left. By, in a sense, a lunacy on the left. And that lunacy is primarily expressed through, I think, what on the extremes of the left, one could view as a radical form of egalitarianism. And what Leonard Peikoff in DIM talks about egalitarianism as the most evil idea possible. The idea of the equality of all people, equality of outcome. That we're all the same, equal, metaphysically, morally, in spite of reality, as a negation of reality. That the purpose of the state, or that the purpose of education, or that the purpose of culture is to show us that equality, to bring about that equality as a moral, political, cultural ideal. And that this is what drives the left's view of sexuality. There is no such thing as male or female, or differences between male or female. It's all just fluid. It's all just whatever it is. And it's all just the same. It's all just because there are no differences, because differences mean inequality in something. Well, men might be stronger than women. Well, that's no right, so there can't be such things in men and women. Are just now, granted, only kind of the wacky left believes this, but most people who want to challenge this are afraid, are silent. I mean, egalitarianism, economically, let's destroy the fantastic health care that most Americans have, the amazing health care that they have by having insurance. And let's destroy that by giving everybody a pathetic, weak form of national health care that in every other place in the world that's used it has resulted in nothing but mediocrity and people dying, waiting, because that's what mediocrity does. It waits, it sits and waits and can't do anything. Egalitarianism is the destruction of life, best represented as Don Watkins and I describe in Equal is Unfair. Equal is Unfair, a book I recommend that if you haven't read, you should read. It's available on Amazon. Best represented by Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, by death and destruction. Everybody who's ever aspired to equality of outcome in any form has only resulted in death and destruction. And death and destruction of the able above all else. So we have a lunacy of the left in pretty much everything, from postmodernism to the negation of sexual identity to economic suicide and nuttiness and destruction, to identity politics, which raises up races and organizes them based on who oppresses whom when, and tries to flip it all around. So we've talked about several times about intersectionality on the show. All of that is today dominant on the intellectual left, on the academic left. Now, granted, most leftists don't buy into most of this garbage, but nobody has anything to say against it. Very little to say against it. And certainly on the statism part of it, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees about Medicare for all. Well, maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not in one step. Maybe we do it the Biden way and do it slowly. But everybody knows that the ultimate goal is Medicare for all. And ultimately, what does the right have to say about that? Well, nothing. The right, the traditional right, the conservative right, agrees with the left on almost everything. They don't challenge them. They're afraid to challenge them. They cower before them. And on economic, political issues, they adopt their programs. I've often said the Republican Party today is the Democratic Party 30, 50 years ago, and the Democratic Party today is the Socialist Party 30, 50 years ago. The whole map has moved to the left politically. And you saw that in Marco Rubio's speech yesterday. So the right has failed in everything in challenging the left. And indeed, even on those things where the left is right on, gay marriage, the treatments of gays, the right, from their perspective, from the perspective of the right, has failed. So even when the left is right, or when the left is wrong, it's the left that sets the agenda. The right has basically been impotent. It's been unsuccessful in almost everything that it's done. I mean, as BAP writes, whether out of loyalty to the general leftist social sphere in which the conservative intellectual establishment lives, or out of simple fear, mainstream and traditional conservatives have completely discredited themselves by failing to oppose the violent radical hatred and other forms of unprecedented insanity coming from the new left. And he's right. He's right. The Marco Rubios of the world, the people who represent conventional right, the people who represent conservatism have failed, and they know it. They've been unsuccessful in challenging what the left has done, and they bought into it, and we know why. We as objectivists know exactly why. Because the right has bought into the altruism, has bought into the collectivism, and if you buy into the altruism, and even you buy into the collectivism, and ultimately you're more subjectivist because you're religious after all, and you get your morality from another dimension, from some God, you have nothing. You have no leg to stand on. You have no standard. You can preach the Founding Fathers, but they have zero understanding of the Founding Fathers. They have no knowledge of the Founding Fathers. They can't comprehend the Founding Fathers. Because they are not. Modern conservatives are not men of enlightenment. They are men of post-enlightenment, anti-enlightenment, or pre-enlightenment. In their religiosity, at least, pre-enlightenment. But in their collectivism, in their tribalism, in their altruism, they are post-enlightenment Kantians just like everybody else. Just like the left. They share their philosophical foundations with the left. So we have a situation in America today. We have a nutty, lunatic left that ultimately succeeds step by step. It doesn't think it succeeds because they're so out there that they haven't gotten to the way out there stuff that they'd like to do. But they are moving in that direction and have been for 100 years steadily, systematically, with almost no stopping. And you've got a right that's impotent in stopping them. Now that creates a huge opportunity. A huge opportunity for somebody on the right, or even on the left, but predominantly on the right, to say, well, you guys are impotent. You have nothing to offer. You can't solve our problems. This is what they're saying to the conventional right. You have given up. A new strategy is required. A new approach to fighting the left. And look, what unites the right today is their hatred of the left more than anything else. So you have failed. You have failed in what you've done. And what is going to rise up are now new alternatives to how to defeat the left and how to create a new and better world. One of those alternatives, I think there are basically two alternatives to the conventional right. Two alternatives to conventional right that are rising as we speak. And I have a clear view on which one of them will win, which one of them will become dominant. But there are two of them. The one is a nihilistic right. And we'll talk about that because that is clearly where BAP and BAM fall. On the nihilistic right, where the alt-right ultimately falls. Where the Groypers and the Nick Fuenteses and the whole alt-right ideology falls. And a second, I think more powerful, ultimately more dangerous, and ultimately successful, is the nationalists, particularly the religious nationalists, who will oppose both the nihilists and the impotent and lead the right wing towards its promised future. So there, to me, is where the right is. Three pieces of the right. The establishment right, the conventional right, the right that dominates politics, is impotent. It's nothing. It's nowhere. It's failed. It's licking its wounds. It has nowhere to go. The nihilist right is on the rise, particularly among young people. It's inspiring. It's, if you read everything written about it, it's fun. It's interesting. It's action-oriented. It's about doing stuff, smashing things, making fun of people, doing memes online, protesting. And finally, there is where I think the more intellectual right, where I think the thinkers on the right are gravitating towards, and that is the nationalist right, the much more explicitly fascist right, the right that is going to take elements from the nihilists, take elements of the alt, but rally them around a real cause, not a cause of just smashing things. They'll take advantage of that. The fascists always do. They rally the nihilists behind them, use them as the stormtroopers. But rally them towards a cause. Rally them towards something, towards a mission, towards an ideal, towards a future. Because nihilism presents no future. And of course, you can see elements of both in each, right? You can see elements of nihilism in the nationalists. And you can definitely see elements of the nationalist, fascist in the alt-right. They will unite in the end. They will serve one purpose. And again, the nihilists will become the stormtroopers for the fascists. They always do. They always do. The nihilists of the Weimar Republic became the stormtroopers, became the SS, became the most adamant of the fascist, nationalist Nazis. So that is the sad state of the right. That's where we are today. A dead establishment. And the more vibrant portion among young people is the alt, and the intellectuals all gravitating towards nationalism. Now, what is this BAP-BAM stuff? Now, first, nobody knows who this guy actually is, BAP, Bronze Age Pervert. He uses that as a pseudonym, again, hiding his true identity. Somebody said that the biggest secret right now on the right is people are hiding his true identity. I don't know, I guess fear of reprisals from, from the left or from the conventional right. I'm not sure who exactly would go after him. He is clearly well educated. He's clearly well read. He's clearly, immersed himself in writers like, certainly in the Greeks, in Greek mythology, in Greek philosophy, or at least certain aspects and certain parts of Greek philosophy. He has immersed himself in Nietzsche, and you can see much of Nietzsche in him, in Schopenhauer. In many respects, or in the most fundamental respects, he is a Kantian. He adopts Schopenhauer's Kantianism. And in that sense, he is no different than the left and no different than the conventional right. And that's why the outcome will be no different than the outcomes have been throughout the 20th and 21st century. What does BAP advocate for? Well, first, for the fact that the world that we live in today is horrific. We are ruled by incompetent nothings. Our big corporations, our businesses, our big tech, our big finance are all dominated by the same people who rule our political life, by the same type of leftism, by the same type of mediocrity, by the same type of nothingness. Generally, BAP is very Nietzschean. He divides people basically into two, maybe three categories. the nobodies, what does he call them, yeast men or bug men, just the average common person who doesn't think for himself, who just follows the party line, who doesn't care, who doesn't live, importantly, doesn't really live. And then there's the great men, the men of science and technology, but more importantly, the men of battle, the men of the sword, the men of conquest. BAP is very much about the physical world. BAP is very much about lifting weights, but having an amazing male body, but emphasizing your masculine strength, about being physical out there in the world. And he admires physical heroes. He admires the heroes of mythology, the heroes that use muscle in order to achieve their aims. He is, he is a pessimist. I mean, he says Americanism is dead. There is no America. And he says even when there was an America, it was America of white supremacists. It was an America that most people wouldn't want today or wouldn't recognize today. So he worships a kind of a Bronze Age, an age of heroes, age of naked men, buff, running around with swords, killing the bad guys. That is his image of grandeur, his image of, I guess, greatness, of masculinity, of what it means to be good. So, again, like everything else in these things, there's an element of truth. It's true. It's true that most men live mediocre lives. That in the world in which we live, most men, most women are nothing. They have no grand values. They don't strive for any great virtue. They're not engaged in self-perfection. And there is a sense in which even taking care of their own bodies is being ignored. The obesity epidemic, I hate to call it epidemic, the obesity phenomena in America and in many of the Western world, it really is an expression of self-hatred, an expression of resignation, an expression of lack of self-interest, lack of egoism, lack of self-love, lack of caring for oneself, lack of caring, lack of thought, lack of reason. So there is a sense in which, there is a vast majority of people today that don't know and don't strive to what is possible to man. What is possible through virtue, through great thought, through reason to human beings. But BAP rejects reason. Reason is not important. Actually, there's a section. I was going to read you this quote if I can find it now because I've got so many windows open up. Let's see if I can find it. His quote on reason. It's somewhere here. Give me a second. Oh, here. Here's a quote on reason. Right? No great discovery has ever been made by the power of reason. Whoa! All great discoveries were made by the power of reason. No great discoveries have ever been made by the power of reason. Reason is a means of communicating imperfectly, some discoveries to others. And in the case of the sciences, a method of trying to render this communication certain and precise. But no one ever made a discovery through syllogism. That's true. But that's not what reason is. Through reason, through this makeshift form of transmission. But you see, this is the problem. This is his Kantianism. He doesn't know what reason is. And this is the dead end that people get to when they don't know what reason is. When they can't tie virtue and morality to reality, to success, to making your life your own, to making your life a success, to rising up from this mediocrity or below mediocrity, this negation that for so many people, life is just a living death. This is why suicide rates are so high in America, because life is a living death for so many people. It just is uninteresting. It's boring. It's worse than boring. It's a struggle. It's painful. It has no purpose. It has no meaning. This is why people like Jordan Peterson are so successful. Because so many people out there feel that there is no meaning in their life. There is no purpose to what they're doing. There is nothing noble. There's nothing important to strive towards. But instead of offering values, real values, moral values, BAP offers weightlifting, improving the body. And he says, and I think he takes this seriously, although it's hard to tell because of the nature of the alt-right, when they're kidding, when they're trolling, kidding, or when they're actually being serious. He says that beauty is the good. The good is beautiful. Literally, they are the same thing. Ugly people are bad people. Beautiful people are good people. Virtue is in beauty. Now, that's pretty amazing because so much of beauty is outside of our control. But again, this is a Nietzschean, a post-Kantian, deterministic view of man. A negation of free will. A negation of what makes us human. A negation of what makes us heroic. A negation of what makes us good. Because good is the chosen. Good is the chosen. Good is not what you're born with or happen to be born with. I mean, read Hugo to understand that ugliness does not imply vice. So what's amazing about this is how enamored these writers are with BAP. I mean, these conservatives find him fascinating, stimulating, interesting, funny. Everything I read of him, I mean, he's a decent writer, is pretty conventional, filled with what seems to me clearly conspiracy theory, paranoia, clearly paranoid. Most of these alt-right are paranoid. He lies, he takes all kinds of stuff, even on the left, exaggerates the power of the left, exaggerates the evil, exaggerates the influence, as most people do, who are motivated by fear. That's the other thing that's stunning. That what drives BAP and BAM is fear. What drives the whole alt-right phenomena is fear. And yet they claim to be heroes. They claim to be the heroic characters. Big, strong, powerful. That people should be afraid of them. Nobody's afraid of a bunch of cowards who think there's a conspiracy theory behind every action, who are afraid of a bunch of lefties who have nothing to say, who represents nothing in the world out there. In one passage, BAP writes, I mean, think about this. He writes, if you fail to see that you live in the Soviet Union of the 1970s or 1980s, or rather something even more oppressive than the Eastern Bloc of that time. It may be you don't know about the threats, financial ruin, and mob violence that Trump supporters and anyone really who steps out of line has been subject to since at least 2016, but actually since some time before that. Really? Are you nuts? Do you know what the Soviet Union was like? He claims to be a big reader, and that Solzhenitsyn is one of his heroes. Have you read Solzhenitsyn? Have you read what the gulags were like? What it was like under Soviet oppression in Siberia? You compare that to anything happening today in America? We have no gulags. We have no concentration camps. Yeah, you might get fired from your job if you say politically incorrect things. I thought you were a man. Have a spine. Get another job. Would you want to work for a company that would fire you over your ideas? I mean, assuming your ideas were semi-rational. I wouldn't blame anybody for firing somebody like BAP. Are you really so afraid of Antifa that you have to make them into some kind of big conspiracy theory rather than a bunch of punks? Alt-left nihilists? But no, according to BAP, Antifa is the establishment's paramilitary force. I mean, this is paranoia. This is fear. This is the ultimate in fear. And this is what you'd not expect from somebody advocating for heroism, manliness, standing up to the left, countering this world. Give me a break. I've stood in front of Antifa. They're nothing. They're nobodies. They're nothing to fear. They're impotent. All right. Been going on for a long time now. So, what we've got today in response to the left, in response to the weakness of the conventional right, is an alternative right that BAP represents the nihilistic version of it. No, he's the more intellectual nihilist. He certainly is more intellectual than the other alt-right people that I've seen. All, at the end of the day, stand for nothing. Really? Beauty is virtue. Virtue is beauty. I mean, that is teenage nonsense. And indeed, is a reason why the alt-right is a young boys' ideology, if you could even call it an ideology. It's not. There are no ideas there. There are no thoughts there. It's pure emotionalism, driven by an emotion of fear, driven by a lack of purpose, driven by a lack of understanding of the world around them, a lack of meaning in their lives, an emptiness, a real emptiness. And of course, into that void, and it is a void, into that void, yeah, somebody says, this is Nazism. Yeah, this is Nazism. This is the kind of social realism that both the communists and the Nazis projected in their artwork. Soulless beauty. Empty strength. Characters in sculpture that have the beautiful, masculine, heroic, supposedly, but no soul, no meaning, no spirit, just a body. It's this kind of nihilism that led to Nazism. And it's the alt-right has to ultimately lead to some form of fascism. And of course, the alt-right and BAP himself are racists, they're sexists, they hate women, they despise women, they view women as sexual vehicles and nothing else. They don't respect women's intellect. Women are there to serve men. To serve men in what? In sex. And little else. To breed. It's a primitive ideology. A primitive ideology. A pre-Enlightenment ideology. And again, the only outcome of the growth of these ideas, and it is growing, alt-right is growing, you don't notice it because it keeps growing in different places. It used to be small on the internet, and it's split up into all kinds of little groups, and now, when books come out, they sell tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of copies, authored by these alt-right nuts. Now, the problem is that what the alt-right, what the alt-left, what generally the people at the fringes of society identify is something real. And the only solution that people have out there is a reversion to tribalism, collectivism, fascism, nationalism, to collectivism, because all the alts have not broken the paradigm. All the alts have just reverted back to an ancient philosophy, a medieval philosophy. All the alts are just another version of Kantianism. All the alts, all these alternatives to the right and alternatives to the left and alternatives to the status quo, they are all just variations on the status quo. None of them reject collectivism. None of them reject altruism. None of them reject sacrifice. I mean, some of them, like this BAP stuff, they reject Christian altruism. That they reject. So they reject the idea of self-sacrifice by embracing the false dichotomy of, if you don't believe in sacrificing yourself to others, then you must believe in sacrificing others to yourself, which is what BAP is ultimately calling for. So the only alternative given to you, the only alternative presented to you by the left, by the right, by the alt-left, by the alt-right, by all these people who think they're radical, who think they're interesting, who think they're different, who think they've invented something new, all of what they're presenting to you is the same old altruistic garbage. That the only choice in life is between sacrificing yourself and sacrificing others to you. That the only choice in life is which group do you belong to, and whether that group is strong or that group is weak. That reason is impotent. That inductive knowledge is meaningless. That what must rely on is the will, is some kind of spirit to guide you, some kind of intrinsic knowledge to tell you what is right or what is wrong, what you should and shouldn't do, and where you should go. And of course, nihilism and hedonism are all that is left once you reject reality and once you reject the individual and once you reject morality. All that's left is emptiness, darkness, nihilism. There's only one alternative. And that alternative requires us to return to the values and virtues of the Enlightenment. And the only way to return to the values and virtues of the Enlightenment are to return to Ayn Rand, or to discover Ayn Rand. Because it is only objectivism, that offers an alternative, offers an escape route from the altruism and collectivism and mysticism that dominate every aspect, every corner, every part of our culture. And indeed, objectivism is the only philosophy that offers an alternative to the nihilism, the hedonism, the emptiness, the darkness, the meaninglessness, the mediocrity of life. Not just of modern life, of life forever, of life since the beginning of man. Since the beginning of man, we have been grappling to discover philosophy, to discover the right way to live, because we're not animals born with genetic instructions on how to live. We have to discover it. And for most of our existence as human beings, we have screwed it up. We've been ignorant of what it takes to live a good life, what it takes to rise up and become a human being, to become a man, to become a woman. For most of mankind, we have been, in BAP's terminology, bug people. We have been nothings. We have been barely surviving. We've been somehow struggling to survive, and sometimes, luckily and through some genius's own strength, some of us have managed to live a good life. Leonardo da Vinci comes to my mind. And some, certainly in the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. And here and there are characters who seem to live in spite of the age in which they are born. But mostly people just live with a small little L. They survive. But life is about more than just surviving. It's about living. It's about enjoying life. It's about being immersed in happiness, in values, in the struggle, in the pursuit for values, in self-perfection, in trying to make oneself the best that one can be, in driving oneself to be a hero, a real hero, a hero of the mind, a hero of value, a hero of virtue, a hero of self-perfection. That's what heroism's about. It's about using reason to guide one's life, about using reason to make one's life the best life that it can be. Yes, it's about being healthy. Yes, it's about eating well. It's about being fit, which doesn't necessarily mean bodybuilding, which I find to a large extent pretty vulgar, pretty materialistic, focused on the muscles, when the most important muscle is our brain and you can't even see it. But that is what shapes who we are and what we are and how heroic and how good and how virtuous we can be, and ultimately how healthy we are. Because it's through thinking we discover what health is. So I have nothing against bodybuilding, but the idea that virtue is bodybuilding, virtue is muscle, that's the idea that leads to violence. No. Now, I like the fact that BAP emphasizes beauty, but not physical beauty. Although, to be physically as beautiful as you can be is a virtue. To be as healthy as you can be, to take care of yourself is virtuous. But the fact that you are born physically beautiful does not make you good. It is the choices you make. It is the striving towards surrounding your life with beauty. And there, primarily, that is the purpose of art, of aesthetics, of architecture, of just having an aesthetic view of the world. Beautiful flowers, beautiful sculptures, beautiful building, beautiful space, beautiful environment. That's what life is about, creating that. But to do that, first one must create your own soul. One must understand what to you is beautiful. What is heroic? What kind of a soul, what kind of a life do you want to live? Anyway, I've been going on for an hour now on quite a rant. But the only solution to this quagmire is a true set of virtues and values. And that is, Ayn Rand, that is Objectivism. If you want to be a hero, and we should all want to be heroes, overcoming great challenges, to be better, to be the best that we can be, then yeah, you got to take care of your body, but more importantly, you got to take care of your mind. And to take care of your mind and your body properly, You need to define your values. You need to have a clear in your mind, a hierarchy of values. What is important to you? What do you love? Why do you love it? You have to integrate those values using reason, using your life and your happiness as a standard. You need to learn how to fight for those values and not give in and not stand down, not write under a pseudonym, coward. But stand up for what you believe in. Defend what you believe in. But first, define what you believe in. Most people don't. The difference between great men and mediocre men is that great men define their values and then strive to achieve them. Most mediocre don't. They don't define them. They never define them. They never try. You know, we started off with the egalitarianism on the left. Objectivism rejects egalitarianism through and through. The only meaning of equality is political equality. The equality of rights, the equality of liberty. That we each free to live our lives in pursuit of our own rational values. That's the only meaning of freedom, of equality. Egalitarianism is an evil philosophy. But again, the alternative to egalitarianism is not aristocracy. The alternative to the egalitarianism is not some class of people enslaving another class of people. The alternative to egalitarianism is not slavery. That is the false dichotomy that BAP presents us. That is the false dichotomy that the alt-right presents us. That is the false dichotomy that the nationalist right presents us. If you're against egalitarianism, they tell you, you must be for white supremacy, or you must be for aristocracy, or you must be for exploitation, you must be for slavery, you must be for something where one class exploits the other. No. True equality means nobody exploits, means no exploitation, means living free, means making your own life for yourself. But you see, part of the problem with BAP is he's not an egoist by any means. What is the highest outcome? It's to be adored by others. It's to be revered by people around you. At the end, BAP is just a second-hander. He wants to be heroic not because it's going to make him a better person. Not because he's fighting for any kind of values that are good for him. No. He wants to be heroic because he'll be remembered. He wants to be heroic because people will adore him. Because people will cheer him. He ultimately is being determined by the other. He is a nothing. And that's what the right nihilists are. In the end of the day, they are nothings. And one of the writers, let me see if I can find him. One of the writers gets that. Right? He writes, this is how he ends his essay. He writes, for all his charming bluster, he, BAP, ultimately has far more in common with Jordan Peterson than Genghis Khan. As if Genghis Khan is the standard, right? A lamb who dreamt he was a lion. The same can't be said for all the forces currently fomenting beyond liberalism, many of which have gone further than Frog Twitter's juvenile, if necessary, nihilism, to something else entirely. There are even rumors of a certain notorious Harvard professor who speaks of friends and enemies and desires to bring not peace but a sword. And it is these forces, he writes, embryonic in form, though they still are, which will mold the future and bring an end once and for all to Frog Twitter's impotent nihilism and the liberalism which gave it birth. Melchizedek, one of the fog posters, the greatest fog poster, this is one of the alt-rightists, understood this better than most and foretold it when he wrote, quote, "To become men, he went down to the cave of scrap metal where the medicine fog danced and sealed our soul in a doodle on the wall of memes. They say one day a heat wave is going to come and melt that wall away, and there will be nothing left of us. They know they can't survive." And this guy writes on, this guy's, and that day is almost here. Thus, now might be the right time for BAP to take some of his own advice. Be careful. In other words, these nihilists are kids. They don't know what they're doing. The people with the real swords, the people who know what they're doing, the people who have a clear agenda, left or right, who knows? They're coming for you. They're going to wipe us all out. They're going to put an end to this liberalism in the American sense. They're going to put an end to these nihilists. And they're going to establish that religious nationalist world. Whether they're leftists or rightists won't matter anymore. What we know they will be is thugs. What we know they will do is be authoritarians and oppress us all. Liberal Deutsch asks, alt-right nihilism versus religious nationalism. Sure. Thought it's alt-right nationalism versus religious totalitarianism versus some violent racist nuts. No, I think, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly what it's going to land up being. I think the religious nationalists, who are totalitarian, that's their nature. I mean, you're creating false dichotomies here. And by their nationalism, will probably be racist. That is who ultimately will dominate. And will ultimately probably unite left and right. So, you're thinking in two narrow categories. The alt-right nihilists, to some extent, are nationalists. To some extent, they're religious. Nobody's completely consistent with their ideas. Consistency's for suckers or objectivists. Right? And the religion totalitarians are also nationalists. And the violent race nuts are religious and totalitarian and nationalists. I mean, these are all false dichotomies. They create umbrellas. They unite people around something. What that explicit flag is going to be, I don't know exactly. But it'll be something along the lines of religion, nationalism, race. Those have typically been the misintegrators, in Leonard Peikoff's dim hypothesis terminology, the misintegrators of the authoritarians. Either race, either nation, or religion. Those are the things that unite people. Those are the things that people can get excited about, that people can rally around. Those are flags that have meaning to people. Nobody supports nihilism. Nihilism is dead, will die. It's not dead yet. It will die. Nihilism is the tool of the religious, nationalist, totalitarian, racist, whatever you want to call them. It's the tool. It disintegrates society so somebody can come and unite them all. It makes us so depressed, so miserable, so pathetic, so hateful, and so fearful that we can't wait to be united by somebody, by some force. All right, we'll leave it at there. And again, I think the only alternative is objectivism. And objectivism meaning, and objectivism not as some abstraction, but objectivism is a way of living. Objectivism is a way for you to identify your values and to live your life for yourself, guided by your reason. The only savior is a true understanding of Americanism. individualism and reason, which are at the core of America. Reason and individualism, which should be at the core of your life. I would highly recommend reading Leonard Peikoff, The Ominous Parallel, and DIM, the DIM hypothesis, disintegration, integration, and misintegration. Unless we integrate, unless we are integrated, we are lost. Let's see, we got a few questions here. Any chance Peikoff Podcasts will ever get the metadata updates so that the content descriptions show up in the podcast apps? Leonard Peikoff's content is going to get a big overhaul. We're going to launch a peikoff.com new app, not just a podcast, but everything Leonard's ever done. All his old radio shows are going to be digitalized, the podcast, all the courses, everything will be in one place. And when we do that, I'm hoping that all that metadata will be easy to search and to find and to engage with. So, this second to Ayn Rand, there is no more important information out there. There's more important ideas out there than Leonard Peikoff's. So I encourage you all to find whatever you can of Leonard's and consume it. All right, would you be willing to debate the YouTuber Jean-François Guerpé, who is a moral nihilist, PhD biologist, and well-known in the alt-right? Maybe. I'll have to look him up. I might be willing to debate him. I might not. But who's going to sponsor the debate? Who's going to put him on? I don't do debates on my show, but if somebody is willing to host it, I might be willing to do it. I've debated lots and lots and lots of people, so certainly willing to debate more. But I don't like nihilists, so it depends on the kind of nihilist he is, and if he's a racist, then I won't debate him. So I don't debate racists. There's certain ideas that are so despicable in my mind, so offensive, so horrific, that I will not debate people who hold those ideas. Racism being one of them. Noam Chomsky being another. So, I can look him up and you guys let me know who would host such a debate. Are they more M2 nationalists based on race or more based on God in America? I think more on God today, but I think the M2 nationalists are growing and the racists are growing. I think racism has become more acceptable. I haven't talked about Donald Trump's role in everything I described, but BAP clearly understands Trump's role in everything I described. BAP views Donald Trump as, in a sense, kind of the chief nihilist. Trump is the guy who came in to shatter things, to destroy things, to knock things down, to offend the status quo. Trump is the one guy who stands up to the left, and that's why the alt-right admires him so much. And he's also a bridge to the nationalists. So Trump is an important figure here. And this is why I consider him so dangerous and so bad. Because he has basically shown us the complete impotency and emptiness of the establishment right, of the establishment Republicans. And he's offered us a bridge from that establishment to the two groups that I think will ultimately bring about the destruction of this country. That is the nihilists and the tribalists. And the nihilists and the tribalists overlap. There's a huge overlap between the two, right? Paul asked, don't both sides have religious, he means left and right, don't left and right have religious elements, tribalism? Absolutely. And that's why I said, I don't know if at the end, the authoritarian regime that rules us will be from where we see the right or the left today, because I think ultimately they converge. Ultimately, they're the same. Ultimately, they all are in some way or another mystical, and they're all tribal. And what will win in the end is tribalism and mysticism. The witch doctor and Attila, in Ayn Rand's terminology. That is where we're heading. And Trump is while he's viewed as this anti-leftist, but he's an anti-leftist only in his nihilism, and the only positive ideas he presents are on the authoritarian nationalist bent. He's fear-mongering. He plays to fear, which all these elements play to. Nationalism, religion, and the nihilist all play to fear. They don't exist without fear. And I read you the quotes of how fearful they are, of the left, of each other, of the world, of reality. They hide behind muscles. Psychologically, they hide behind muscles because that is a way for them to pretend they're not afraid. They're wusses, they're wimps, they're nothings. Building muscles to do what? From reading about ultra-successful film Joker, it appears to be either glorification or appeasement of evil. Have you an opinion? I haven't seen it yet. I'm waiting for it to show up on iTunes or on Netflix. As soon as I see it, I will give you a review, and I'll definitely see it. It's an important enough movie culturally for me to see it, but I didn't see it in the theaters. Is it possible to think life as utterly meaningless outside of what we create and not be nihilist? Absolutely.